Welcome and thank you for joining us today for NetSecOps, examining how network and security teams collaborate for a better digital future. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speaker is Shamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering network management at EMA. Shamus has nearly 2 decades of experience in the IT industry. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks, including network automation, AOps-driven network operations, multi-cloud networking, and WAN transformation. And before I hand things over to Shamus, I wanted today's audience to know that he will be concluding his event by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA with the on-demand playback, as well as some additional information on this new research. So I hope you will check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus?
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you everyone for joining me today. As Raleigh said, I'm the Vice President of Research at EMA. And basically what I do is I try to understand exactly the priorities, the experiences, the challenges, the goals of people who are responsible for their networks, their employers' networks, whether it's a campus network, Wi-Fi, switching, data center, cloud, wide area network, whatever. Like I survey thousands of people a year. I talk to dozens and dozens per quarter about all kinds of things, just trying to stay on top of what their concerns are and what they're doing. And one thing I've seen in the last few years is these networking guys are finding themselves interfacing more with their counterparts in the security organizations, cybersecurity, security operations, etc. So this research is going to dive into that. And to make it possible, these 3 companies sponsored the research. They provided financial support. They didn't have any editorial control. They didn't see the report until it was published. But they get to have their logos here, and they get to look at the data and use it for their own purposes. And so I want to thank these 3 sponsors: Blue Cat, which is a well-known vendor in the DNS, DHCP, and IP address management space; Broadcom, which you've probably heard of because they do like 1,000 different things. But in this case, the financial support is coming from their network management tool group. And then Endace, which is a specialist in the area of capturing packets from the network for network analysis, security analysis, and other purposes, because everyone knows packet data has a lot of information in it that can be useful. So for today's agenda, I'm going to start out with a little bit just to give you some context about research goals and the methodology I use for this research. Then we're going to look at why, and I call it NetSecOps, which means network security people working together in operations. Some other analyst firms might have a different definition of that. They might think of it as more like aligning network and security groups with DevOps practices. I'm really interested in just the convergence of networking and security people, either from a collaborative perspective or even an organizational perspective. And so we're going to look at why that's happening. Then we're going to talk about why it's hard, but why it might be worth doing. Challenges and benefits. We'll follow that up with a couple of technical areas. One, network data, which I think is an important area of the collaboration space between these groups. It's kind of like a currency, if you will, of information that the two of them, the 2 groups can work together to achieve their goals with. And then tools. What kinds of tools are people using for collaboration? And specifically going to look at monitoring tools and automation tools to some extent. And we'll close out with some final thoughts and an opportunity for questions, if any of you have any. So research goals and methodology. On the left, you see a chart of 3 different surveys mapped over each other. I first surveyed people in 2020 in a research project about whether or not, this is a survey primarily of NetOps people. I said, are you collaborating more with your security counterparts? And then I asked it again in 2021 in a research project that was dedicated to the topic, which was the first iteration of the NetSecOps research that we're talking about here today. And then now we did it again at the end of 2023. We did this survey, which is published last week, asking the same question. So here you see over time, their answer to the question is collaboration between networking and security teams in your organization increasing. If you look at the right, significant increases is ramping up pretty steadily from 29% to 34% to 36% now. Somewhat increased is kind of like all over the place. But what you see on the left is no one is really telling you that these groups are working together less. Everyone is reporting, for the most part, like 80+%, and every year we've asked this, well, at least a couple times. 80, well, okay, simplify, 86% this past year said that collaboration has intensified. So we need to investigate why that's happening and how you can do it right. Also on the right, you see security silos. I mean, network and security silos are collapsing. 51% of the people we surveyed said, well, actually, we still have separate network and security teams. And incidentally, anyone in this survey who did not have enough complexity in the organization to have specialists that could be siloed into separate groups, like people who told us that they have like a lot of IT generalists and don't really divide networking and security from a functional perspective, we kicked them out of the survey. This was only for enterprises that had that level of specialization among their people. So 51% said we have separate network and security teams. And that's the way it still goes. So a majority still do that. You see 35%, 35.5% told us recently we fully converged these groups in some way. And then less than 14% said we've partially converged. So maybe we put together teams that are tasked with collaborating on certain things like cloud migration or Internet of Things or whatever, or secure access service edge or what have you. So that's what's happening from a silo perspective. So research goals, let's reiterate it here. Why are network and security teams coming together, and what are the best ways for them to do that? And then the methodology, we surveyed 304 IT professionals who came from an organization with enough complexity and specialization to have separate functions for networking and security. And you see here who these people were. A lot of them worked in an IT executive suite. A lot of them worked in a network engineering team. Many of them worked for a cybersecurity or IT security organization. You see some NOCs and SOCs in there, IT architecture and cloud groups as well. There are probably 15 or 20 industries represented, and the biggest ones were online services or software as a service, the financial industry, retail, wholesale distribution, manufacturing, healthcare, pretty well represented too. And you see it's enterprise in terms of company size and revenue. We at least $100 million in annual revenue, at least 1,000 people working for you. And then it was a transatlantic study of North America and Europe. So we're talking about the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, and Germany were the 5 countries in the survey. So why are these convergences happening? We asked them first on the left, what are the technologies and initiatives that are most responsible for this collaboration? Network and IT automation strategy was a big one. Think about it from this perspective. Network team starts implementing network automation tools. Security groups like, well, if you're going to invest that money, could you really focus on compliance and making sure that when you make a change in your network, it doesn't introduce security vulnerabilities and things like that. And then secondarily, you see a lot of cloud and with hybrid cloud at 31% and multi-cloud architecture at 28%. And you see secure access service edge, which is the integration of software-defined wide area networking solutions and cloud-delivered security into a unified platform. Naturally, cloud-based security like firewall as a service and other like cybersecurity solutions, secure web gateway. Those are things that may be owned by the security group, and then wide area networking, definitely owned by the networking team. So naturally, there's going to be some collaboration there. And then on the business issue side, like what kinds of things have happened in your company that have made you take a look at this convergence of network and security to some extent? And you see labor issues, skills gaps is the top one. Like they can't find enough skilled people, so they think, well, if we pool our teams, maybe we can cover all our bases more easily. And then new regulatory requirements, that's kind of self-explanatory. Recent cybersecurity incidents. We need to make sure that we don't mess up on the network again. So security team and the network team are going to work more closely together so that does not repeat itself. And then budget challenges where, hey, maybe we are repeating our efforts in certain things. If we consolidate our efforts, we save money. Like, why do we have two separate tools that kind of overlap? Why don't we have one tool that does it for both of us? Or, why are we both dedicating a person to this when we could have one person doing it and sort of like running reports and audits for the other team so that the other team is confident that it's happening as they want it to. Things like that could drive down budget challenges. So zooming in on the secure access service edge piece, it unifies network and security architecture, which means that in a lot of organizations, these groups need to work together to make it happen. Because what we're seeing right now is like 99% of enterprises have adopted software-defined WAN, right? So they've got the SD-WAN piece, and many of them are looking at evolving their SD-WAN environment to a SASE solution. And when that happens, that pulls a lot of security into the WAN architecture, and that's when you need to work together with the security group. So you see on the left, SASE impacts on collaboration between networking and security. More than 80%, almost 83% told us that they've seen at least a slight increase in collaboration in between networking and security because of their engagement with secure access service edge. Less than 4% said it actually leads to a decrease in collaboration. And so on the right, you see like who's responsible for each of the following aspects of your SASE lifecycle. So you see the blue bars for each one: vendor selection, budget, implementation, day two operations. Shows you that in each case, it's most often a responsibility shared equally by both groups. So they're both trying to select vendors together. They're pooling budgets. They're working together on implementation, and they're also working together on day two operations like monitoring, troubleshooting, response to security incidents, managing security policies, managing network changes together to some extent. Now you see like the others that don't do that sharing, like there's certain other tendencies here, like vendor selection is more often in the hands of networking personnel than it is in the security personnel, which tells you that it starts with SD-WAN probably more often than the secure service edge piece, like this cloud-based security piece. Budget is kind of, you don't see a lot of difference there, but security personnel a little more likely to be solely responsible in networking. Implementation, it's the other way around, and then day two operations, pretty close too. So, but the big story here is like lots of shared responsibility for the life cycle of SASE. And then cloud, public cloud. In my experience, just talking to people for years now, like I talked to network engineers, network architects a lot, and the theme was always, well, they took away so much control when they moved things into the cloud. Like they told me to just worry about the corporate network, and the cloud was something I wasn't allowed to touch or even look at. I think that's changing, and I think the security teams are also feeling that way. Both of these groups lost a bit of control in the early stages of cloud migration, but more recent years, they're coming together and they're saying, you know what? How about we work together around cloud connectivity and security and establish some guardrails for how the cloud teams should operate and build, and make sure that they don't break things or expose things that they shouldn't, because a lot of cloud teams, they don't think about security and connectivity the way we do. They don't understand it at the way we do, and we have something to offer. And if we give them something that's easy to use, maybe we can get them to play ball. And so you see on the left this pie chart The orange and the blue, those are people saying that the use of the cloud has led to some increased collaboration between networking and security groups. And where are they collaborating? Well, they're focusing on technology implementation, security incident response, network troubleshooting, and infrastructure planning and design. So design and build and operate. And also cloud traffic is key. Like 88% said it's at least somewhat valuable for both networking and security teams to have access to the traffic in their cloud. So like, I want to get, we got to get some visibility and some data off related to traffic, cloud traffic in our AWS, Azure environments, maybe traffic going between those environments, going between our data center and the cloud. We need that data for both networking and security, network operations and security purposes. So we've established some of the big reasons why they're working together. What are the challenges for them to work together? Because if it was easy, they wouldn't even be separate silos. They'd always they would have grown up, from the early days of the digital age together, but they didn't. Because when you think about it, networking guys, they want to connect people to things, and they want those people to be able to connect to things easily. Security guys want to limit the things that people can connect to as much as possible. Those are like diametrically opposed goals. So naturally, they don't work together well. But, what happens when they can pull it off? So most IT organizations think that network and security teams could improve the overall collaboration. Like only 45%, which is actually a pretty good number, 45% said that the collaboration between the networking and security groups are a complete success. That's pretty good. Most of the rest said that most of the others told us that things are pretty good, but could be better. And then like a very small percentage said that they're completely failing at this and just not pulling it off. But 45% saying it's good. We're partnered well. We got no concerns about how we work together. That's really strong. But what are the challenges? Well, number one, 35% told us that their biggest issue, or one of their biggest issues around collaboration, is just data, like data quality and authority issues. You collect data here, I collect data there. How to, which is the best record of truth and reality? Your data is missing some things. Like, are we both collecting packets? And if so, are you dropping a lot? Like, are there a lot of errors in the data you collect? You collect data at a different interval, like you're collecting this data every 5 minutes. We collect it every minute. Like, how do we square that? Things like that can be challenging. And then budget conflicts and control, also a top issue. Hey, I don't have the money for this. You need to buy this. Why am I paying for the SASE project? It's helping you too. And then architectural complexity. We've already kind of talked about complexity to a great extent, like multi-cloud, SASE, IoT, automation. All that stuff's really hard to do. And so when two groups come together trying to make it work, it can be really difficult, especially if there's skills gaps, which is the next one there. Like, security guys don't know a lot about networking. Networking guys don't think they know a lot about security, and they do, but they don't often know about certain aspects of security that the security group really masters. Like, oh, I know how to configure a firewall and manage the policies on it, but I have never heard of that tool you're talking about right now. Like, what is that? Oh, this is just like the 10th tool I bought this year and learned how to use, the security guy says. And then cultural resistance and conflicts. That's no big surprise. Like, security guys are a pain in the neck. They slow things down. Networking guys are too reckless. They introduce mistakes. Why would I work with that guy? They both say. IT executives, we asked these people in the survey, like, are your IT executives doing anything to sort of promote this collaboration? You see the top four right here. 48% said they're implementing shared best practices and workflows for them to work together, which is really helpful, especially across silos. 45% said they're actually reorganizing groups or consolidating middle management, maybe getting rid of those directors who are like trying to protect their turf. I actually talked to one person for this research because I interviewed a few people one-on-one in addition to the survey, and he told me that collaboration really improved when a new CIO came in and replaced a lot of middle managers who were not on board with the idea. And then 45% said they were increasing budgets to help with this, and 42% said they're deploying some kind of shared tools, which we'll look at a little bit in a second. We asked people, you know, how effective do you think these four things and other things that your IT executives do to encourage collaboration? How effective do you think those procedures and programs and plans and directives are? And one thing we noticed was that people who were like lower in the organization, such as administrators, engineers, and architects, were the least confident in these measures. Like middle management and IT executives, CIO, CTO, CISO, VPs, they were more convinced that all these things that you see on the right of the screen were helping. So that's something to keep in mind about the gap between those two cohorts. Outcomes. People tell us that basically when these groups work together well, they are more secure, more efficient, and they find it, you know, they're faster with solving problems. So, you know, benefits of success on the left, you see 43% said, you know, the big thing for us was we reduced security risk. 40% said, well, we're just operationally more efficient. We're spending less time on tasks like, oh, I got to generate this report for the security team or whatever. It's, you know, pain in my neck. It takes me 40 minutes to do the report the way they want. Now they're not spending that 40 minutes. Maybe they've put in some sort of controls and tools in place to do it in like 5 minutes, you know. But then also other big wins are we're faster at resolving networking problems, and we're faster at detecting and resolving security issues. And here's a quote from an interview I did with a network engineering manager at a mid-market travel and hospitality company. He told me that his networking team has more exposure to the security team's environment, and it's helped his people troubleshoot a lot of issues, but it's also helped make the right decisions for the business because he says, we know each other's environments and we're eliminating knowledge gaps. So I know what the networking teams, we know what the security team knows what we're doing, and we know what the security team's doing, and like we don't surprise each other and mess things up. All right, let's look at network data, which here we say it's the foundation of collaboration. It's the currency of collaboration. Network teams are telling us that they need to deliver packets to the security team. Actually, like conversationally, like I hear from network engineers all the time where the security group will come and say, we need to see all the packets that went between all your VLANs in the data center. And the networking guys will say, that's a lot. Do you know what a VLAN is? So there needs to be a system in place to deliver very targeted packet data to the security teams or enable them to get it themselves. We asked on the left, you see the pie chart, how valuable is it for a security team to have access to full packet data associated with the traffic that traverses your network? And 48.7% said somewhat valuable, and 38.5% said very valuable. So the bottom line is the vast majority say there's a point to doing that. 83% of network teams have at least partial ownership of the infrastructure used to collect packets. You know, that's like the taps they use, the network packet brokers, the network capture appliances. That means they need to set up systems to ensure that they are ready to deliver packet data to security teams, and it's got to be targeted data. It's got to be the right data, because if a security guy comes to you and says, I want to see traffic all the traffic that went between VLANs in our data center today, you're going to have to send them a lot of data, and you don't want to do that. So what you need to do is you need to educate them to ask you for what exactly they're looking for, target it, and then filter traffic in a way that they can analyze it, without overloading their tools and losing their minds. What are the security team's top use cases for the packet data network teams send them? It's all about investigating endpoint security tool alerts, investigating network security tool alerts, investigating SIM and XDR alerts. So we got alerts from these other security tools, and we think packets can give us answer to those alerts, answers about what those alerts mean. And then 30% said we've seen indicators of exfiltration, and the security team wants to investigate that. So it's really about packets being the answer to what does this alert mean in this other tool that the security team owns. DNS data is also critical to cybersecurity. You see here, 87.8% told us it's at least somewhat valuable for the network and security teams to have access to. I'm sorry, that's the wrong. That is the wrong chart there. But I don't know how that chart got in there. That's about public cloud. But what should have been there is a chart about the importance of DNS data going to the security team. And what we saw there was well over 80% of people said it was at least somewhat important for the network team to send DNS data to the security team. Now, the issue that we have here is that enterprises tend to have a lot of fractured DNS infrastructure. Like the network team might own a huge chunk of it, but then the server teams will have their own DNS. Active Directory team might deploy their own DNS. The cloud teams will have their own DNS, maybe like different DNS in every, if you're multi-cloud, like you'll have like one in AWS, you have another type of DNS in Azure. One guy who was responsible for DNS in his network once showed me he ran like a discovery of all the different types of DNS servers that were in his public cloud environment, and there's just hundreds of them. And he wasn't really in charge of any of them, but at least he could run a report that could show them, and he could sort of like reach out to the owners and try to figure out, what it's for and stuff like that. So only 50% of network teams told us that they're able to provide the data from their DNS environment, like the logs and query data from DNS, to their security team. 38% said we can provide most of it, but some remains inaccessible because it's owned by someone else. And 11% said we can provide some, but most of it is inaccessible. So it's a problem. You see this security architect at a software and services enterprise telling me we've had a lot of projects around DNS to make sure that there aren't any unapproved DNS queries, that there's less risk of random DNS servers being used. Like that's the security architect saying that. Security architects usually don't own DNS. It's the network team that really has all the expertise there. So like that's a clear indication that they are working with their network teams to really get this under control, so that not only is there not unapproved DNS out there, but when you want to collect data from DNS, you can do it because you own it, or at least it's under your control to some extent. So tools for NetSecOps collaboration. Network automation. 91% of the people in this survey told us that they believe network automation tools are valuable collaboration facilitators. Successful collaborators were more likely to say it was critical. And 94% said that their aim is to use this automation to enable self-service orchestration of their resources, both networking and security resources, by other teams, like DevOps teams, application teams, server teams, what have you. And that gets to the whole idea of establishing guardrails in hybrid multi-cloud. As I mentioned earlier, like people are trying to establish guardrails in the cloud for the cloud teams, and automation is a key piece of that. In terms of use cases, we asked people, like, what are the use cases for network automation that help you with your collaboration between networking and security? And the two big ones were, security incident response. We have, we see an indicator of attack or whatever and our security tools, and we can say, hey, network team, we need to shut down these ports. And network team's like, no problem, I've got the automation in place to do that right now. Or hey, what if I gave you access to the automation tool so that you can pick which ports need to be shut down or whatever. 44% also, that gets kind of to the threat isolation or remediation piece as well. 44% say they're helped by that. 39% said it helps with like network trouble remediation, which actually the people who are most successful with collaboration were more likely to select that. And that can be like, for instance, maybe the security team makes a change to firewalls that really makes a mess of how the network's performing. And the network team says, hey, can you revert that change through automation? The security team says, no problem. Or, hey, how about you do it? Because you know what's actually going wrong. Like, what did I do wrong? And he goes in and uses automation to fix that. Compliance reporting and infrastructure provisioning were secondary areas. Like reporting, compliance reporting speaks for itself. That's kind of self-explanatory. Infrastructure provisioning, just like automation enables them to sort of work together on like intent for network security and network connectivity, like making sure that those are aligned through automation is a big opportunity. So network automation is a big piece of this. And then network monitoring tools are another area that can be useful for collaboration, especially tools that deliver security insights. Like 86% of the organizations in our survey told us that they have network performance management solutions that provide security insights. And 58% of those people said that both their network team and security team consume those insights. So it's delivering value to both. What are those insights that are of most value? 52% say they have some sort of network detection and response or traffic analysis capability in their performance management tool, and that is very valuable to them. 43% said it's just nice to have health and performance monitoring and reporting on the security infrastructure. Like a question that gets asked of so many network teams is the security guy comes and says, "Can you tell me if these firewalls are okay?" Like I have some concern on my end that maybe there's a failure of an interface or something, and the network team says, I have this tool that can provide the insight. Obviously, 40% say that these security insights enable correlations of abnormal network health and performance with suspicious activity. Like, oh, we're getting a blast of traffic from this IP in the Middle East or from Russia, and what are you seeing on your security side? And then 32% say it helps with inventory assessments, just, because a lot of network monitoring tools have very strong infrastructure discovery capabilities, for instance, that can pull on inventory data, and that is obviously offering value for when the security team wants to understand, are you fully patched and up to date on your software, on your switches, your routers, etc. And then again, on the topic of monitoring tools, there's this concept of shared monitoring tools. I think a lot of vendors are trying to sell this to the enterprise. Hey, instead of having separate tools for monitoring the network, why don't we give you one tool that you both can use? 88% of the people in the survey said it could be valuable, at least somewhat valuable, if not very valuable, for network and security teams to deploy this as a shared tool. But I think there are a lot of reservations around things like who pays for it. Like, do both of our teams have the necessary skill sets to use this tool? Because if it's a tool coming from the network side, like you are familiar with how to use it, but my security guys aren't going to know how to use it. Who has control over it? Is it collecting certain types of data the security team would rather network team not collect or see? Things like that. Like, you shouldn't see what's inside these packet payloads. So there's those concerns, but here are the things that correlate with enthusiasm for shared monitoring between networking and security. People who told us they have a multi-cloud architecture were very interested, or at least enthusiastic about the potential value. People who are adopting secure access service edge were more likely to see the potential value. Interest in actively monitoring network infrastructure for product vulnerabilities were very interested in this. And then people who saw a need for network monitoring tools that can reveal both application security and application performance insights also saw the value of a shared tool. So that tells you that if they're pooling their resources on a shared tool, they can buy a more expensive tool, perhaps, that has a lot of application layer intelligence, for instance. So I've been talking nonstop for more than a half hour. I'm just going to give you some final thoughts here, and then we'll take some Q&A. But first off, just to reiterate, 86% of the companies in this survey told us that they're seeing growth in collaboration between networking people and security people. Multi-cloud architectures and secure access service edge were key areas of collaboration that we explored here. Network data is collaboration's currency, especially packets and DNS data. We have multiple paths towards collaboration because we saw that in this survey, there are both siloed network and security teams and newly converged NetSecOps or teams reporting successful collaboration. I will say, however, people who said they're only partially converging their networking and security groups are less successful with collaboration than people who are either siloed or fully converged. So either do one or the other. Don't go halfway, basically, is one thing we saw. And we also saw in the research, successful partnerships drives reduced security risk, operational efficiency, and faster resolution of problems, both on the networking side and the security side. And those are all good arguments for thinking about doing this systematically and carefully and effectively. So organizations should, and finally, organizations should examine how network automation and network monitoring tools can facilitate these partnerships. If you don't have tools in place that are able to power that, maybe you should look for other tools that can help you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Raleigh, who can moderate Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Shamus. Before I jump into the questions, I wanted the audience to know that you can learn more about the report by visiting enterprisemanagement.com. You can also check out the sponsor sites. They should have the report listed on their sites as well. So Shamus, jumping into the questions, the first one is, you mentioned that most security teams need access to packet data. Does this apply to the public cloud too?
Yes, it does. More than 80% said that they saw some value in getting that public cloud data, both to the networking team and the security team. And actually, we asked people in the survey, like, to what, how deep is your visibility into cloud traffic? And we saw a lot of variation. Some people, I think like 30+% said they actually can collect packets from their cloud environments. Most of the rest were collecting like network flows of some kind, either like, maybe they had some way of getting NetFlow or IPFix out of cloud environments in some way, or they're collecting, proprietary flow data from their cloud provider, more likely. And then some of them said, we got nothing. And then others said, well, we can see where traffic's going, but we really can't get any information about the traffic. Like, we can see what's hitting interfaces in stuff, but we don't really have like source or destination information, source IPs, destination IPs, anything like that. There are a few people that had that. And basically what we found was, like, the deeper their visibility, the more likely they were to report to us that the networking team and security team were working well together, which tells me that, like, just they're being more effective operationally when they got that deep data visibility, like the packet data that they can use as like an absolute source of truth about what is happening on your network.
Thanks, Shamus. Can you also discuss what stops network teams from having more control over DNS?
I think I alluded to a little bit. So, like, it's, first of all, DNS has for a long time was not an enterprise solution. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people, if they needed DNS for a certain service, whether it was a website or just some servers in a data center or whatever, it was easy for them to deploy like an open source DNS server. Back in the day, before things got more complex and digital services became more critical to the life of a business, they could rely on some open source thing that wasn't supported and wasn't scalable. And the same thing would happen in other areas, like, for instance, Active Directory. Microsoft just bundles a free Microsoft DNS server with Active Directory. So people doing Active Directory who needed a DNS server for that would just use that, and networking teams would not necessarily know it was there. And then people in the cloud, like, every cloud provider offers some kind of DNS service. There's services for hire, like DNS service providers that business units that aren't even affiliated with IT organizations might be able to go and use, like, if they're trying to work around IT to move faster with deployment of some sort of cloud service. So what happens is you just have a lot of decentralized services, and the network team doesn't always have control. And if they get the green light to take control, it's a lot of work to assert themselves, because they've got to replace all this stuff, or the less painful route would be to manage it themselves so that they don't let the other groups who don't know as much about networking and security manage it and screw up things. So like you'll see a lot of people who have like enterprise grade providers of DNS and IP address management stuff and DHCP servers. They'll have like a vendor, like one of the sponsors of Blue Cat. They'll have a vendor that does that, but they can't necessarily get the green light or have the bandwidth in terms of people to rip out a lot of the DNS that they have in place, or the willingness for counterparts in other silos to rip out the DNS that's in place. And so what they'll do with a vendor like Blue Cat or one of Blue Cat's competitors is they'll do some sort of like overlay management integration so that their enterprise solution does some management of that DNS around configuration and security policies and stuff like that. But it's just, so basically you hear me like prattling on like this, it's just really complex. Like I talked to a network architect at a university, and that's like one of the biggest areas of challenge, because like he was talking about how like individual colleges and departments in the university are deploying their own DNS, and he was not allowed to tell them they couldn't do that, you know? So like you've got like the engineering school who's doing all this high-tech stuff and research, and they're like, they've got the expertise in-house to deploy like an open source DNS server in their building for certain things, and the network team is like, you should really do that, but I'm not allowed to tell you you can't, you know? So that's a huge issue. And so when the security team comes to the network team and says, I want better DNS security in the organization, I want to be able to analyze all the DNS queries that are coming from outside the firewall into our network, and can you do that? The network team will say, well, I own 40% of it, and I can definitely give you most of that. So that's what's happening.
Good insights. Thank you, Shamus. Let's take one final question. It is, what kinds of network automation tools support this collaboration?
There's a lot. First off, IP address management, DNS management, DHCP management, DDI vendors, like they automate a lot of the stuff that I was just talking about around DNS, which is an area of concern for security. And if you have an enterprise grade DDI vendor in place, that helps a lot. But then just like network change and configuration management tools, whether it's like legacy tools that have been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, or next generation tools that describe themselves often as like intent-based networking or network automation and orchestration tools that can manage config and change and config compliance. That can be a very powerful tool if the security team can set like security standards and policies in the network automation tool that the network team uses to make changes to the network. That can be very useful. But there are other ones too, like there's like firewall management automation that just that automates the policy management. That can be very powerful. And that might be owned by the security team, might be owned by the networking team. Network and security teams that are working together might want to share management of that. And it goes on. Like anything that you're automating, you think about like, if you're a networking team and you've got something that automates a process, would it be useful for the security team to evaluate that? Like, would it be useful for the security team to look at your automated processes and say, hey, could you add this to ensure that you comply with this? You know, or could I have reporting from that tool so I know what kinds of changes you've made and I can sort of analyze it, you know, things like that. All of it is useful. Any kind of automation that you have in place, if you want to take the time to explain to your cohorts and your colleagues in the other silo how it works, you know, and what it can do, they might have some ideas about how it could empower the two of you to work together.
Thank you, Shamus, for all that great insight on your new research. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback and more information about the report. I also invite you to check out the sponsors' sites. They should have the report available on their respective sites, and you can learn more about their solutions as well. So please check those out. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.